All right, and we're live. Cool. So, yeah, if you guys want to share it around as well, you can share the link to the Hangout and the YouTube video, which I will post in here as well. Find it. Cool. They keep moving stuff around in Google Hangouts, and it's hard to find. Oh, there's a chat. All right. Here's the link to the YouTube if you want to share that around so anybody can just watch it live and ask questions using the CMX Hangout hashtag. And
cool. I shall tweet it now.
Me too.
We should have done this before we went live.
Yeah, it's okay. Hangouts are a little bit freeform.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna tweet this out so everyone can. And also, if you guys want to tweet to me, okay. All right, we are good.
All right.
I'll keep this window open so if anyone wants to tweet, they can. Cool.
Sounds good. One more thing.
What are you working on over there?
Just getting the word out. Spamming all my followers, the usual. All right. Cool. Well, all right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm David Spinks. I am the founder of CMX Media. We host CMX Summit, which is coming up in 2 weeks. So if you like community stuff, you should come. It's in New York on June 12th and 13th. Amazing people like Nathalie are going to be speaking. And so we wanted to be able to kind of give the community an opportunity to ask questions and kind of meet some of the speakers and just get to know a little bit more about Nathalie before the event. You know, get you excited about seeing her speak live. So, Nathalie, I'll hand it over to you real quick to tell us a little bit more about yourself. What do you do? What is web psychology? And yeah, take it away.
So I am indeed a web psychologist, which means that I'm interested in how our online environments influence our behaviors. So things like how do you get influenced to take certain actions, whether you're receiving a newsletter or you're on a social media site or you're on a website. And the kind of work that I do, it's based in academic research. So we look at all these different fields, things like human-computer interaction, behavioral economics, you've got digital ethnography, you've got kind of neuroscience, all these different fields that look at aspects of why and how we behave in the way that we do online. In terms of the kind of stuff that I do, I write books. I've written one so far, working on the second, ideas for the second. I consult, I train people in how to apply web psychology. And I talk with wonderful people like I'm going to on, well, 2 weeks from next week. 2 weeks from next week? A week on Friday, isn't it? Yeah, in the morning. So that's what I do, yeah.
Yeah, we're less than 2 weeks away. It's a week and 6 days, so
yeah, the countdown begins.
I know. Very cool. So how did you get into web psychology? What did you do before that? Have you always just done that?
So I did, first of all, like a psychology BSc, which is before any of this stuff existed. And there was like a computer sciences department, but that was for the super geeks, which is like these really smart, really good people who are amazing at programming. But then it wasn't until I went through the music industry, I spent 5 years in the music industry doing recording and all sorts of things and performing, that I ended up in web design because I didn't want some guy to, you know, do it for me every 2 years and have to pay through the nose. So I was like, well, how hard can it be to design and code a website? So I learned how to design and code websites. And then was looking for a job, couldn't get a design job. You know, in London it was really, really hard. And then a friend of mine was like, look, Nat, don't do it. Just don't go to a design agency because you'll find it boring. Because some people are really good at doing one thing in depth and other people are good at doing several things at once. And I think I prefer that. So he introduced me to some entrepreneurs. I met one woman who's amazing called Araceli Camargo, who has a sister space, actually, innovation space in New York called We Create NYC, which is fantastic. You should check it out. She invited me to come and do a talk on psychology of intuition for entrepreneurs, which is totally bizarre. thing to do, but she did. And so I started reading again on like research papers to see if I could find anything, and then realized actually that it was really interesting, having not touched psychology in about 8 years. And then suddenly thought, well, I wonder if I can combine my psych with the design and performance side, because I like to communicate. So I kind of thought, well, I shall write a book, because there weren't any books on the subject, and so that's kind of where it all started. Yeah.
Very cool. And just so everybody who's watching knows, just use the hashtag CMX Hangout and post on Twitter with any questions you have, and we'll make sure to ask them here as well, which I should make sure I'm following the hashtag. Cool. So you got into web psychology, you got into kind of understanding design. So like, tell us a little bit more about like how like businesses can apply or websites can apply web psychology. Like, what's the actual application where if I'm somebody who wants to be better at connecting people with each other, or the way they use websites, how can I start applying those things to my work?
I think the first thing is to have an understanding of who you're targeting. So I kind of segment all the research and all the knowledge into 3 crucial steps. So the first is know who you're targeting, which is about understanding not just the demographics of your target audience, but also the psychographics. So things like what are the universal psychological forces at play? So things like the need to belong, needing social validation, which Facebook has understood very well with condensing social validation down to like a little tiny like button. And then so if you look at the universal factors, the next stage down from that of understanding who you're targeting is around being able to communicate persuasively. So reflecting the preferences and needs of your audiences. And then the next step down from cultural psychology is then individual differences, things like personality. So things like Big 5 factor personality model, neurochemical differences, differences that occur throughout life as you age, gender differences. So if you can understand how to communicate persuasively based on all of those contexts, the third and final step is to be able to employ psychological persuasion techniques with integrity. And that basically means using the techniques to an end goal which benefits both the customer and yourself. It has to be mutually beneficial. So I think if you have a wider understanding of those 3 things, so know who you're targeting, communicate persuasively, and then sell with integrity, that creates a foundation on which to build a business, whether you're building communities or you're in e-commerce or you're in marketing. But having a solid sort of basis in psychology will really help.
All right, so say we don't know anything about psychology.
Right.
What do you mean by applying psychological persuasion techniques? Like, so you understand a lot more about the people in your community now or in your audience. How do you start actually putting that into action?
Okay, so for instance, you could take the example of if you get, specific to community building, if you have a group of people and those who are the most emotionally expressive, which will come out online through videos or through the language that we use, will tend to kind of literally infect other people with their emotional state. If you know that's the case, which research shows us that it is, then you can decide to reach out to those key emotionally expressive people, those key influences, to guide the kind of like the emotional wavelength of the group. So if, say, for instance, you want people to be in a highly aroused state to be able to buy something for a community organization or a ticket or whatever it might be, then you can reach out to those influences so that they can naturally then start spreading the word and changing the mood of the group. There's some other interesting factors at play, such as the idea that if you have sort of a certain percentage of a group that exhibits social rules. So if you say, okay, well, everyone in this group wears checked shirts like we have in Shoreditch, you've got the hipsters, then you could say, okay, once you reach about a certain percentage, usually the tipping point is around 10% of the population adopting a certain behavior, then the rest will also follow. So there are certain things like that that you can think, well, for an organization or a ticket or whatever it might be. I think you need to mute yourself because I can hear myself to think, okay, cool, thanks. So things like that that are useful for people to know about. So the idea that we tend to be infected by the moods of those who are most emotionally expressive. We tend to modify our own sort of views on things based on the views of the group. You can also look at things like reputational systems. So if you're trying to get a group established and you're trying to establish certain types of behaviors online, reward systems can be very, very useful. So instead of offering extrinsic rewards like money or prizes, you can give people credits for becoming top influencers like LinkedIn does, so top influencers of the week, or like SlideShare does, SlideShare presentation of the week, etc. I could ramble for ages. It's just some examples. Please stop me.
No, it's good to actually hear the applications. I think like psychology is really, at least personally, I'm like really fascinated by it and I love to learn about it. And then the actual practical application of it is something that isn't talked about as much. So like you can understand human psychology and you can understand how the brain works, and then like how do you actually put that into, how do you integrate that into your day-to-day work is always, it's good to hear more examples like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's so many places that you can start. There's so many books and literature that you can read around the subject. So things like the use of scarcity, or the use of social proof, or loss aversion, or the peak end rule, any of these things that kind of you can hear about, or the use of permissive language on websites if you're trying to get someone to buy something or to do something, or the use of body language in videos or in photography. There's so many different angles that you can look at, or so many principles that are freely available out there that I write about, that lots of other people write about too, that you can just pick a handful and then test them to see if they work in the context of what you're doing. Yeah.
Cool. Lisa, you had a question for Natalie.
Yeah, hi Natalie.
Hi Lisa.
Thanks for coming. I'm curious about, I found there's several different types of community. There's the communities that people, like a LinkedIn community, or people who have a common interest maybe in woodworking, like on Reddit, where they have different communities. And I tend to be more involved in communities where they get paid to be, not to be a part of the community, but that's kind of why they're there. So they might be employees, or they might be, contractors doing some kind of work. And I'm curious if you've studied the difference in how those communities interact with each other, how people opt into those, or anything about that.
So I don't know loads about it because my area is more around the design of persuasive environments, but I do know that there are some interesting crossovers in terms of the kinds of clients that you get and the kinds of communities that you get. So for instance, if you have, which point do I want to start with first? If you have a community in which you're part of that community for the expertise that you're going to get, and part of the validation process, or part of the process of becoming accepted as an expert is to pay a fee, you're creating a different set of values around the idea of value. So this idea that if you're paying for something and you're getting a certain range of experts who are at the top of their game who can afford a subscription fee, then your perception of value goes up. So that's quite a different scenario than, say, for instance, getting people who aren't paying for stuff to then get given prizes to contribute, where they're actually, the community started off around core values and like-mindedness, which is kind of a separate community it's talking about. So I think one of the most important things with this is to be clear what the goal of the community is, whether people are there for, to comment and connect with people around a common subject, or whether they're there to essentially purchase knowledge. And then the kinds of ways that you'll create value within both of those systems will be different. So the transactional one, which is the one in which you're exchanging money, you're getting value through the pricing, and then the relational one, which is where you're combining, your minds over a particular subject. I wouldn't want to comment more just because I haven't delved into it enough to give you an academically thorough answer. Sorry. Oh, unmute yourself.
You're still muted, Lisa.
Oops, I'm obviously awesome at this. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your answer and kind of validating that they operate in different ways.
Well, so I can't give you more of a detailed answer. I think with a lot of these things, they're never quite discrete categories. There's always some crossover that happens in between. And I think one of the things that you find out more and more as you do research into this, no matter how much you've read about the subject or you've practiced in the subject, is that whatever you believe to be true, when you test it, there are always exceptions. So you could say, okay, well, this works in this instance, we're expecting it not to work in the other, and then you might find that actually it does work well in the opposite way than you might have thought. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
I always find it interesting with, like, depending on what kind of community it is, it should always bring some sort of value to people, and you'd be surprised what that value is. Sometimes it is information or knowledge, and other times it's just that sense of belonging and that identity and feeling like you're not alone. And there, I think like David McMillan's like community psychology stuff is really interesting on that front.
But I think even, and that's one of the things that kind of crosses a sort of a meta psychological blueprint that you find, is that there is always an element of identity, no matter what group you're joining and for whatever reason, whether you're paying for the group or you're joining around common values, there is still an identity level thing. So for instance, if I'm going to pay for LinkedIn and it's a professional thing and maybe it's a bit more transactional because it might be that I'm getting clients there, then I'm still identifying LinkedIn as a site for professionals, and it means that I have to believe that I'm a professional in order to join it. So there's still kind of like a common identity. So even if you think it's a transactional site or a transactional community, there are elements of the personal that you can't ignore, that will also influence the way in which you interact with others. And what's interesting is that even those sites that have been set up to kind of be knowledge forums, it's often the stuff that is separate from the main theme of the site that will generate the most conversation. And one of the things that's really interesting is that if you create a container or a space in which people feel safe enough to self-disclose, to disclose things that they're struggling with or that they're inspired by, the stuff that's a bit more around kind of like the emotional vulnerability side of things, then those are often the communities that have the greatest sense of identity and that flourish the most. And that create the greatest advocacy as well. So it's kind of, there is always the kind of the interpersonal that is present, whatever kind of community you're building.
Cool. Jonas, you had a question?
Yes, I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jonas.
Yes. Hello. So I missed the introduction of the Hangout here, but I will ask my question anyway. It is regarding the so to say balance between individual community management and automated or automated community management. So because I'm thinking about some of my favorite services or companies that provides me with services through the web, for example, a reading app called ReadMill, and also for products like Mute Watches, a wearable technology, where they have a very good sense of this individual contact in community management. I also actually know a person who works at ReadMill because they have had such good contact with me. And other companies, for example, say bigger ones like Instagram or Facebook or whatever, can never achieve this individual connection to their users. But anyway, it gets some kind of community management and sense of social belongingness to these services and companies. So my question is, what are your thoughts about this balance of individual connection or company individual connection to create this social value and social connection to a service?
That is a really good question. Well, I think the first thing that I'd like to comment on is the idea that you have, if you're talking about having an individual that's managing, or several individuals usually that are managing a brand's community, versus a situation where you have a platform whose individuals, who the influencers are people who are within the community. So you've got the kind of the people at the top here who are influencing and managing, and then in the second one you've got the people who've created the platform, and then these people who are kind of like the top influencers within the community, and then kind of like the structure, like you have on Facebook, for instance. I think the routes for influence take very different forms in each. So for instance, if you have a platform which provides a functionality that people absolutely love, then they will create advocates who then act as informal brand ambassadors that will then, through the way that they post or the way that they interact, shape the community. So in terms of the stuff that they post, the stuff that they respond to. And I think that the issue with that, or the difficulty, the challenges there, are that the brand themselves, because they don't have that direct connection, they have less of an ability to be part of the conversation and actively shape the way in which that community grows. And so you can end up with pockets of communities that then spring up that have different and often conflicting roles or identities and ideas. With the other one, so if you look at things like Beta Brand or smaller companies, even things like Mashable, we've got Pete Cashmore, which is kind of like almost I don't know, the kind of the brand evangelist, if you like, you end up with much more of a personal face to the company. And so with that, it becomes much more of a dialogue, so that even if you're perhaps say a lurker and you're not actively participating like you might be on Twitter, you can see that there's a sense of feeling and a sense of identity and personality behind the brand. And therefore, the way that you perceive that brand will necessarily be more personal. So you're much more likely to have warmer emotional connection and engagement with the brand because you can see that there are faces that are speaking on behalf of them. I'm not sure if I've entirely answered your question, but those are some of the differences that I see in terms of both of those styles of creating communities.
Yes, an interesting answer, and it comes to my mind. I recently read a book called Decoded. Have you heard about it? By Phil
Yes,
Barton, I think.
yeah, I've got it on my bookshelf actually.
Great.
About 4 books to read, but it's supposed to be very good. I've heard him speak. He's a wonderful talker.
Yeah, I think so too. I just finished it, but in one passage of that book, he refers to the question if the brain or a human can perceive a brand or a product the same way as a human. I mean, if the same areas in the brain are activated. And the research seems to conclude that no, the brain cannot perceive a brand or a product as a person. But in this, so to say, social connection to a brand, if you have an actual person, it might be some way of should you say, hack this system to create a personal image of a company, and that would be very persuasive and effective in creating this connection to the users.
Absolutely.
Yes, and then to what would be considered a kind of a follow-up question or follow-up thought here. Do you think there is kind of a threshold for when a company gets such a big user base that is impossible or not even valuable to have this personal connection? Because as you mentioned, it's mostly startups and small companies that can have it so far, because otherwise it would take like disproportionately much time to manage all these people.
I think the answer comes down to the quality of the personal interaction that you're going to have and the quantity of it as well. So for instance, it becomes untenable to have a one-on-one dialogue with all your community once they reach past about 150 people to one. And that's if they're sort of Dunbar's number, the idea that even though we have technological advances and we socialize with a much wider group than we ever have before, there's still a finite limit to the number of meaningful bonds that we can create with people. So in that respect, with that research, I would say yes, it becomes quite difficult to manage a larger community. However, given that online you end up, or actually even preceding online, you had people who are, for instance, celebrities or prime ministers or presidents who nonetheless are able to transmit and project their personality or persona to a huge audience of people, to millions or even billions of people, that will still get a sense of that person. I think that the quality of the interaction may change, but because you're creating either it's a team of people who represent the brand or a person that represents a brand, because you are creating a personal figurehead or a personality that people can relate to on an emotional level, there is still some kind of connection. So it might not be as personal as it once was, but there'll still be someone that's at the head of the ship. You haven't suddenly lost your captain. And I think that the nature changes, as opposed to, it's not that you're no longer able to have someone who is a face of the brand, but it's just that kind of the quality of the relationship will naturally change.
So that gets into the interesting dynamic of like whether it's better or the value of a brand connecting with people, or like trying to create a connection between a person and a brand, and trying to create a connection between a person and other people. And I don't know if you have any perspectives on like the increased amount of loyalty or affinity toward a brand when you're not just connected with that brand by using their product or customer service, but you feel connection to other people around you who are also customers of that brand, or who also believe in the things that that brand represents, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that you're seeing, not only across brands and products, but especially, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, in the US rather, but in the UK, a lack of loyalty to brands and also to political parties. So you often find that these things can track together, and I think people when you're okay, so there's kind of two types of customers when it comes to relationship with brands. You've got the transactional and the relational, kind of like I was mentioning before, the communities. Transactional customers will seek to get the best price, the fastest delivery. It's about the transaction, getting the best transaction possible. So one would expect that people in that camp are not going to be very brand loyal. However, if you have customers in a relational category, which is inherently to do with relating to the brand and to the people who are also identifying with that brand, so saying I'm a Mac versus a PC or whatever it could be, those people are going to be more interested in building a long-term relationship and being seen as a member of that unique group. So, for instance, I was in a shop a year ago in Zara in Covent Garden, and I don't often go in there, but I was in the changing rooms, and there are these two young women trying on clothes, like 20, 21, and one of them was saying, oh, do you like this dress? And the other one said, yeah, I do, but I'm much more of a Topshop kind of girl. And I thought that was a really interesting use of language. I'm more of a Topshop kind of girl. She basically had identified herself as a Topshop branded customer. And what we're seeing more and more, if you look at websites so from the US, Nasty Girl, which is a fascinating website, they're using a platform called Olaplex, which enables their customers to submit images of themselves wearing the products that they've bought, so they become, in effect, models or sort of voices for the brand that then the brand can select and showcase on their website. So essentially what's happening there is you're ending up with people who are creating a relationship with the brand, who then themselves become the face of the brand. And because they're reaching out to their peers, and you get these other young women who want to look like them, you're ending up with social proof, which is, I want to look like them, all these other girls have become models for this brand, I want to as well. So if you're looking at this sort of clothing company where this sort of system is working, where you're creating a community from your community and they become the brand ambassadors, it's an example of how you can create loyalty in a space which is becoming increasingly competitive and disloyal. Any other questions?
I just didn't hear what name you said. Did you say Nasty Girls, or what was the name of it?
Yeah, Nasty Girl. I'll put it in the chat box. Hold on.
Okay, yeah. I have to check it out then.
Have you got it? Let me. Here, Nasty Gal. Okay, so and they're quite fun to look at the way that they do their. Here we go. I'll put it in the chat. There you go.
Oh, thanks.
So I know more people are. Just more people are watching online. So make sure if you have any questions, use the hashtag CMX Hangout on Twitter, and we'll make sure to ask your question here in the Hangout, or you can just join in the Hangout. Go to the event page, and there's a link there as well. Cool. So I'd love to get a little bit more into the tactics behind this. So you spoke a little bit about researching and getting to know the people in your audience as much as possible, so you can better understand what kind of psychological methods to be able to use to engage them and connect them with each other. Can you speak a little bit more about what are some simple things, if I'm a community builder, what are some simple things I can do today to start to really better understand that audience and perform that kind of research?
So you'll no doubt have seen with BuzzFeed and Facebook that quizzes are a huge thing right now. People love quizzes, and we tend to also like answering quizzes that validate what we know about ourselves. So things like, there was one that was done, I think it was on BuzzFeed, where they said something like, what's the best city for you to live in? And basically they did this massive test, but they were basically giving you your answer off of the IP address and your location data, basically. So they would say, okay, so you're in New York, I'm in London, we'd complete the test, we could have completely the same answers, and they would say, David, you would be best suited to New York because it's fun and vibrant and blah, and you'd be like, yay, I'm in the right city. So one of the things about these sorts of surveys is that they increase engagement and people want to find out more about themselves. So a super simple way of finding out the psychographic profile of your audience is to get them to take psychographic quizzes. And there is a short version of what's called the Big Five, which is the kind of the golden standard for personality testing, for personality traits in the psychology world. No test is perfect, by the way, but it's the best one that we've got to date. And you can, there's a shorter version of this Big Five personality trait test that has been adapted for online use. So you could literally just put it up on your community board and say to people, look, we're interested in finding out more about you. We want to tell you more about our members. Get them to fill it out, and then obviously you do it anonymously. And then you create an infographic with the makeup of who your community is and what they might be interested in. You tell them more about themselves, and it's just a really fun and exciting and academically rigorous way of finding out the makeup of your community.
Yeah, I always like, so we're putting together one for CMX now, and we're trying to figure out like what are the kinds of stats that it's good to show people that when they fill it out, it's not just kind of going into an abyss, but then you can come back and like say, hey, here are all your answers, and here's what the community looks like, and give them the kind of results, and use that transparency to engage them more.
Actually, if you're interested in, there's another site that I work with which does these sorts of things that you're welcome to check out, so you get an idea of how to do it if you're interested in doing it. Let me find it. Take the test, which is, let's see if I can find it. I'll post it in the Hangout here. This is an example of how you can use it. There you go. So winningpersonality.com/test, and you can take the Big 5 test, and then it stores your results, so you can go back later, and you can either share it, with the community or not. But yeah, that's one way to do it.
Yeah, it's just for the people who are watching online who don't see the chat. It's winningpersonality.com/test. Sweet. Yeah. Jonas, you had a question.
Yes, a question and a comment on that. We see it on more and more web pages. The fact that the pages themselves, the community, are asking questions about the personality or what users like or dislike or whatever. And my impression of both the Big 5 personality test and a lot of the other personality tests around are they contain like hundreds of items. And one thing I noticed among very different web pages and services is that they tend to split it up. Like you answer one question one time, and then the next time you log into the site, you answer another. And maybe Facebook is the most obvious example of this, that you sometimes can answer like, have you read this book? Yes. And then 3 months later, when you log into, you can rate how much you liked that book. So they kind of split it up into tiny, tiny steps, which I relate to the American researcher B.J. Fogg. I'm sure you know about.
So the behavior chain. Yeah.
What
he's created a very interesting method called the behavior chain, which is when you get people to go through phases of engagement, and then the people who are further down the behavior chain, who are advocates, help the other people to kind of chug through.
Yes, and he also stresses the importance of doing it in really, really tiny steps. Like I think he calls it like baby steps to big change or whatever it is. And I see this is a great example of it, that you can not fill in like hundreds of items directly, but if you split it up into 100 logins, you can fill out the whole personality questionnaire.
I think it does depend on, it depends a lot on the kind of people who are in your community and what the goal is. So for instance, if you've got something like LinkedIn or Facebook where you want people to fill in demographic information, which we are typically loath to fill in, especially females. Research suggests that women are a lot more cautious about providing personal and private information online than are men. So if you're talking about getting people to complete a sequence of steps or to reveal demographic information, then yes, absolutely, it helps to create discrete 1 or 2 item things. The same with TripAdvisor. To get started, they give you one chunk and then a couple of options at the bottom to make sure you're not overwhelmed. So that's an approach to that sort of thing. However, if you're doing a test and people are in the mood to do the test, and you're doing it in such a way that is visually more engaging, like with, say for instance, you've got images or whatever, you can reduce it into chunks, but because you're priming people and saying, look, this is an academically rigorous test, and you're saying this is going to take this much time, and you show a progress bar, then that can be very effective, and the completion rate can be very high, simply because people know that the value they're getting out of it is going to be much greater, and then you're not trying to do it for your own needs so much as to give them a useful answer. So there are benefits to doing it both ways, and it's good to, again, test it. Your community might be one that wants to do the whole thing in one, or they might be people who say, actually, I really couldn't give a shit about this. I'm going to do it maybe in 5 goes. But the thing is always to test, because in some cases, one will work better than the other. Yeah.
We have a question from Twitter from Jennifer Francis. She asked, without including the obvious ones, what are your favorite community sites or applications?
My favorite, off the top of my head, that I really like, I mean, I lurk on it, I actually don't contribute, but I do like, is Jezebel. Because the comments are amazing. I don't know if you ever saw, how are we allowed to be controversial on this chat?
The more controversial, the better.
All right. So a friend of mine who's stateside, who lives on Reddit, he's absolutely brilliant. His name is Matt. Hi, Matt. He told me about the double dick dude. Did you guys hear about this? Anyway, so I was like, oh my God, this sounds totally bonkers. If you follow my Twitter feed, you know that I tweet and I'm interested in sex and gender and all that sort of thing. So anyway, so I was like, oh, I've got to check out this Reddit feed. So I read the entire feed. So obviously you've got a community there that were actually surprisingly respectful given the nature of the subject. And then I went straight off to the Jezebel site, and it's kind of a community in that you end up with these huge long threads. No one really seems to manage them directly, but you do get the people who've written kind of interspersing the comments. And what I love about that site is that you're free to use whatever language you want. People are quite raw, they're quite honest, and it's a very open discussion of whatever it is that's on the site. And you get very little trolling, I think mainly because, you know, it's a fairly permissive arena for all sorts of views. And also the content is always quite provocative, which I really like. So I would have to say that that's my favorite community site, if that counts.
Yeah, the good ones are always the most, like, they really kind of get to the, like, root of humanity. Like, if you look through, like, 4chan or some of the deeper Reddit, yeah, there's, I was just hanging out with Eric Martin from, he's a community manager at Reddit yesterday, and he was telling me about some of the subreddits that are out there, and there's some wacky stuff.
Yeah.
Wacky stuff.
Thing is, you can get so sucked in. This is why I don't use Reddit, because if I did, I would just never work again.
Yeah, it's true. He was telling me his favorite one was the fifth world problems. So you know how you have like first world problems, third world problems. So fifth world problems is they pretend they're omnipotent beings, and there's
the fifth dimension.
Like, oh man, I accidentally erased my planet today.
I like the sound of that.
The communities that are weird are the best ones.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to like learn more about kind of the psychology behind the people who are there. People who are just like always going to be lurkers and always going to be more active and always going to be kind of like the leaders or ambassadors, or is that something that people can change a lot throughout their experience with the community? How does that kind of break down from a psychological level?
I think, well, see, online it's such a nebulous space. So I think there's different research that suggests different things. So usually it's context specific. So what do I want to, okay, so there's a couple of things. So first of all, one of the things that the internet has done is enable people who find social interaction uncomfortable to find a different, perhaps sometimes more comfortable way to connect with other people. So for instance, people who are socially anxious or who might have milder forms of autism or who are very, very introverted, I'm making sort of sweeping statements, generalizations here, but just to give you an idea of alternatives. The people who find face-to-face interaction difficult or challenging, the web can be a really great place for them to be able to connect. So there's that kind of space where if they feel comfortable and they find a community with whom they can connect, then you end up with much better interaction that they might not be able to have offline. But then there are also cases of people who are very afraid of privacy. If the reason, it comes down to the reason why you're not contributing more. If the reason is that you're concerned about your privacy and you don't want to be seen on the internet as saying certain things, then I would imagine it would be much harder to get that person to contribute in a way that's going to be authentic. Then you might have people who are naturally, what we find offline, naturally more extroverted, who are happy to sort of give their opinions and voice out, who then will dominate online communities and conversations, in which case the role of a community manager would be to help create a space and sort of, what's the word, kind of cajole out of the quieter members the kinds of perspectives that they might have. So it really comes down to, I don't think it's inflexible, but it does come down to the reason, the core reason behind why people aren't sharing, and whether that's something that you can work with or that you can meet, or whether it's something that's just going to be a complete block, like I've got to be private, I don't want to share, full stop. Yeah, sorry, that's not a silver bullet answer. Very few of these are.
It's cool. Jonas, you had a follow-up?
Yes, I got reminded of another great book called Situations Matter by
yeah,
Summers.
that's on my bookshelf too. Yeah.
Ah, great. You have a well-filled bookshelf, something like that. But anyway, his book and a lot of research shows like the importance of a situation over behavior rather than personality or whatever. I mean, we can certainly create kind of situations out in the real world where people are contributing or following the social norms are contributing, so to say, and other situations where the same person, although he or she might be very extroverted according to the Big Five scale or whatever.
I think he's frozen. Jonas, I think you've frozen.
Do we lose him?
I think we've lost him.
Come in, Jonas. Come in.
Jonas. That was a really interesting question as well. I wasn't quite sure where it was going. It's about situations mattering, and the context is so important. Context is always important. People behave very differently according to whatever situation you throw them into. Yeah. You can also prime people to behave in different ways just by giving them a simple set of behaviors to follow first. So, for instance, in the UK, we have what's called the nudge unit at the HMRC, and they've been testing different ways to get people to be more honest in their tax returns. And one of the ways to do it in that specific context and situation to be more honest is to get them to sign their name at the top of the form before they fill anything out to say, yes, I'm going to answer this questionnaire honestly. So guessing that Jonas is going to ask something about, do situations matter and can they change someone's behavior more than their personality, and I'd say that it certainly has a big role to play within the way that we behave.
Yeah, definitely. That's like the you get into behavioral economics as well, and you learn all about the way things are phrased or presented will like completely change the way people make decisions, and our decisions are completely irrational, but predictable, right?
Yeah, and I think we like to think that we're rational, and when you actually consider that most of the decisions we make happen outside of our conscious awareness, yeah, there was fascinating. It's a couple of pieces of research. One of them recently came out, and it showed that we're only consciously aware. No, wait, let's do it the other way around because that's a bigger number. So 99.9999% of all the information that you take in is processed subconsciously. Over 99%, which is insane because it means that you're only consciously accessing 0.0001, which is really nothing. So where is all that other information going? You're processing it somehow, but just not consciously. Also, the other piece of research that's worth mentioning is this idea of free will, that we like to feel as though we have free will. But say, for instance, you're going to pick up a glass of water off the table. If you're mapping someone's brain activity, you'll see that actually the brain activity that corresponds with you picking up the glass happens milliseconds before you actually have the thought to pick up the glass. So the activity happens first. You're going to do it. Your brain decides for you, if you like. Then you have the thought, and then the action takes place. So it's kind of, you know, what are you going to... Oh, hang on, we're ringing. So it's kind of this idea, playing with this idea of who actually is in charge. Is it the conscious mind? Is it the subconscious mind? Where does you reside, or where do you reside? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And then you look at like what gets people to keep coming back to a community, or click on notifications on Facebook, or respond to a question or comment. Like you start to really understand like what are the fundamental motivations for getting people to actually interact within a community. It goes a lot deeper than just like whether or not it's like in the moment important to them. Like people, that's why you end up opening Facebook every time you open up your browser, or you end up clicking notifications every time, because you just kind of have that habit loop already built in.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at things like that, there's a really fascinating area of research around habit-forming technology, or yeah, kind of habitual behaviors. And what you find is that, unfortunately for us humans, the more you read about this, the more you despair. Well, it depends on your point of view, really. But the dopamine system, which is to do with our risk-seeking behaviors, so we seek rewards when the dopamine system kicks in, that dopamine system, the wanting system, is a lot stronger and overpowers the liking system. So we seek more than we are satisfied. So if you're thinking, you know, when you open up your browser or your phone and there's a little red icon, this sort of external trigger that says, okay, you've got something, it might be exciting and useful, then you get a spike in dopamine. So what you do, you log in, you check. Your spike in dopamine doesn't fulfill you because it's an insubstantial reward. So the opiate system, which is the liking system, doesn't fully kick in. So you end up in this loop loop of this constant seeking, this lack, this desire, where you're never really fulfilled because it's a lack of satisfying experience. And that's one of the things that's actually quite dangerous, because you end up, going around feeling as though you're addicted to this constant barrage of push notifications and connections, and the actual thing that you crave, the connection, is superseded by this craving for this hit. So it's kind of like the idea that researchers found that when you're sitting at a table, if you've got your phone out on the table, even if it's on silent, because you're aware that it's there, you won't create or dive as deeply into an emotional connection with the other person as you would if it was switched off. And then when your push notifications goes off, it takes 22 minutes to return to the same level and depth of focus. So these sorts of habit-forming cycles or associations of addiction with our phones and reward actually sort of prohibit us from experiencing perhaps deeper and more rich rewards.
Yep, that sucks.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're getting towards the end of the hangout here. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So we're at about 45 minutes. I guess we'll wrap up. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you'll be speaking about at CMX and give us a little preview of kind of like the overview of your talk?
Sure. So at CMX, I'm going to be giving you guys an introduction to web psychology, which is absolutely fascinating. I hope you will agree. And then I'm also going to be talking about how to engage sort of the primal emotional and rational systems of the brain. It's kind of a metaphor for how to connect with people in different ways, so that rather than wait on rational arguments to figure out the most psychologically persuasive ways to get people to interact with you and then to do certain things in a mutually beneficial way. So with that, we're going to have loads of adverts. There's going to be examples of websites. There's going to be videos. It's going to be very interactive. I will pick on you to answer some of the questions that I have. And then there'll be lots of Q&A time, and I'm sure drinking and shenanigans afterwards.
Lots of shenanigans. Shenanigans are sure to be had. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. This was really awesome. We're excited to see you in 2 weeks.
Yay, I can't wait.
It's going to be a good time. And we'll see everyone there again. For people who tune in late, CMX Summits in 2 weeks. Natalie is going to be speaking about web psychology. We got Rich Millington talking about the psychology of communities. Robin Dreek, who's the head of behavioral analysis for the FBI, speaking about how to build trust with anybody. And so we have a lot of really interesting perspectives on community kind of all coming together and giving you a lot of different angles on how to connect people with each other. So it's a good time. It's going to be a good time, and we hope to see you all there. And also, so you want to, so your book is the Webs of Influence, right?
Mm-hmm. So the book is Webs of Influence. You can tweet me at the website. My websites are thewebpsychologist.com and instituteofwebpsychology.com. Ask me any questions you want. Happy to answer.
Cool. Well, thank you so much again.
Me on as well.
It's going to be a good time. All right, cool. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you all in a couple weeks.
All right, see you then.